Knut Hamsun was a Norwegian author, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1920. Hamsun's work spans more than 70 years and shows variation with regard to the subject, perspective and environment. He published more than 20 novels, a collection of poetry, some short stories and plays, a travelogue, and some essays. The young Hamsun objected to realism and naturalism. He argued that the main object of modernist literature should be the intricacies of the human mind, that writers should describe the whisper of blood, and the pleading of bone marrow. Hamsun is considered the leader of the neo-romantic revolt at the turn of the 20th century, with works such as Hunger, Mysteries, Pan, and Victoria. His later works in particular his Nordland novels were influenced by the Norwegian new realism, portraying everyday life in rural Norway and often employing local dialect, irony, and humour. Hamsun is considered to be one of the most influential and innovative literary stylists of the past 100 years. He pioneered psychological literature with techniques of stream of consciousness and interior monologue, and influenced authors such as Thomas Mann, Franz Kafka, Maxim Gorky, Stefan Zweig, Henry Miller, Hermann Hesse, and Ernest Hemingway. Isaac Bashevis Singer called Hamsun the father of the modern school of literature in his every aspect his subjectiveness, his fragmentariness, his use of flashbacks, his lyricism. The whole modern school of fiction in the 20th century stems from Hamsun. On August 4, 2009, the Knut Hamsun Center was opened in Hamarøy. Since 1916, several of Hamsun's works have been adapted into motion pictures. Biography. Early life. Knut Hamsun was born as Knut Pedersen in Lom in the Gudbrandsdal Valley of Norway. He was the fourth son of Tore Elsdatter and Peder Pedersen. When he was 3, the family moved to Hamsund, Hamarøy in Nordland. They were poor and an uncle had invited them to farm his land for him. At 9 Knut was separated from his family and lived with his uncle Hans Olsen, who needed help with the post office he ran. Olsen used to beat and starve his nephew, and Hamsun later stated that his chronic nervous difficulties were due to the way his uncle treated him. In 1874 he finally escaped back to Lom. For the next 5 years he did any job for money. He was a store clerk, peddler, shoemaker's apprentice, sheriff's assistant, and an elementary school teacher. At 17 he became a ropemaker's apprentice. At about the same time he started to write. He asked businessman Erasmus Zoll to give him significant monetary support, and Zoll agreed. Hamsun later used Zoll as a model for the character Mac appearing in his novels Pan, Dreamers, and Benoni and Rosa. He spent several years in America, traveling and working at various jobs, and published his impressions under the title Fra det moderne Amerikas Ainsliv. Literary career working all those odd jobs paid off, and he published his first book about it, Den Gårdfulde, History fra Nordland. In his second novel Bjørn, he attempted to imitate Bjørnstjerne writing style of the Icelandic saga narrative. The melodramatic story follows a poet Bjørn and his love for Laura. This book was published under the pseudonym Knut Pedersen Hamsun. This book later served as the basis for Victoria, N. Karmlide's history. World War II, arrest and trial. During World War II, Hamsun put his support behind the German war effort. He courted and met with high-ranking Nazi officers, including Hitler. Nazi Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels wrote a long and enthusiastic diary entry concerning a private meeting with Hamsun. According to Goebbels, Hamsun's faith in German victory is unshakable. In 1940 Hamsun wrote that the Germans are fighting for us. After Hitler's death, he published a short obituary in which he described him as a preacher of the gospel of justice for all nations. He was detained by police on June 14, 1945, for the commission of acts of treason, and was committed to a hospital in Grimstad due to his advanced age, according to Einar Kringlan. In 1947 he was tried in Grimstad, and fined. Norway's Supreme Court reduced the fine from 575,000 to 325,000 Norwegian kroner. Death. Knut Hamsun died on February 19, 1952, aged 92, in Grimstad. His ashes are buried in the garden of his home at Narum. Legacy: Thomas Mann described him as a descendant of Fyodor Dostoevsky and Friedrich Nietzsche. Arthur Koestler was a fan of his love stories. H. G. Wells praised Marken's Grada, for which Hamsun was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Isaac Bashevis Singer was a fan of his modern subjectivism, use of flashbacks, his use of fragmentation, and his lyricism. Charles Bukowski called him the greatest writer to have ever lived. Work Hamsun first received wide acclaim with his 1890 novel Hunger. The semi-autobiographical work described a young writer's descent into near madness as a result of hunger and poverty in the Norwegian capital of Christiania. To many, the novel presages the writings of Franz Kafka and other 20th-century novelists with its internal monologue and bizarre logic. A theme to which Hamsun often returned is that of the perpetual wanderer, an itinerant stranger who shows up and insinuates himself into the life of small rural communities. This wanderer theme is central to the novel's mysteries: Pan, Under the Autumn Star, The Last Joy, Vagabonds, and others. Hamsun's unregistered trademark prose often contains rapturous depictions of the natural world, with intimate reflections on the Norwegian woodlands and coastline. For this reason, he has been linked with the spiritual movement known as pantheism. Hamsun saw mankind and nature united in a strong, sometimes mystical bond. This connection between the characters and their natural environment is exemplified in the novels Pan, a wanderer plays on muted strings, and The Epic Growth of the Soil, his monumental work credited with securing him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1920. A 15-volume edition of his complete works was published in 1954. In 2009, to mark the 150-year anniversary of his birth, a new 27-volume edition of his complete works was published, including short stories, poetry, plays, and articles not included in the 1954 edition. For this new edition, all of Hamsun's works underwent slight linguistic modifications in order to make them more accessible to contemporary Norwegian readers. Fresh English translations of two of his major works, Growth of the Soil and Pan, were published in 1998. Hamsun's unregistered trademark works remain popular. In 2009, a Norwegian biographer stated, "We can't unregistered trademark T help loving him, though we have hated him all these years." Fata unregistered trademark SR Hamsun trauma. Hey unregistered trademark SA ghost that wanna unregistered trademark T stay in the grave. Writing techniques along with August Strindberg, Henrik Ibsen, and Sigrid Undset, Hamsun formed a quartet of Scandinavian authors who became internationally known for their works. Hamsun pioneered psychological literature with techniques of stream of consciousness and interior monologue, as found in material by, for example, Joyce, Proust, Mansfield and Woolf. Personal life In 1898, Hamsun married Bergljot Gar Paragraph Vert, who bore daughter Victoria, but the marriage ended in 1906. Hamsun then married Marie Anderson in 1909 and she was his companion until the end of his life. They had 4 children, sons Tor and Arild and daughters Eleanor and Cecilia. Marie wrote about her life with Hamsun in 2 memoirs. She was a promising actress when she met Hamsun but ended her career and travelled with him to Hamarøy. They bought a farm, the idea being to earn their living as farmers, with his writing providing some additional income. After a few years they decided to move south, to Larvik. In 1918 they bought Narum, an old, somewhat dilapidated manor house between Lillesand and Grimstad. The main residence was restored and redecorated. Here Hamsun could occupy himself with writing undisturbed, although he often travelled to write in other cities and places. Political sympathies. In younger years, Hamsun had leanings of an anti-egalitarian, racially conscious bent. In the cultural life of America, he expressed his fear of miscegenation. The Negroes are and will remain Negroes, a nascent human form from the tropics, rudimentary organs on the body of white society. Instead of founding an intellectual elite, America has established a mulatto stud farm. Following the Second Boer War, he adopted increasingly conservative views. He also came to be known as a prominent advocate of Germany and German culture, as well as a rhetorical opponent of British imperialism and the Soviet Union. During both the First and the Second World War, he publicly expressed his sympathy for Germany. His sympathies were heavily influenced by the impact of the Boer War, seen by Hamsun as British oppression of a small people, as well as by his dislike of the English and distaste for the USA. During the 1930s, most of the Norwegian right-wing newspapers and political parties were sympathetic to various degrees to fascist regimes in Europe, and Hamsun came to be a prominent advocate of such views. During WWII, he continued to express his support for Germany, and his public statements led to controversy, in particular in the immediate aftermath of the war. When World War II started, he was over 80 years old, almost deaf, and his main source of information was the conservative newspaper Aftenposten, which had been sympathetic to fascist Italy and Nazi Germany from the beginning. He suffered two intracranial hemorrhages during the war. Hamsun wrote several newspaper articles in the course of the war, including his notorious 1940 assertion that the Germans are fighting for us, and now are crashing England's tyranny over us and all neutrals. In 1943, he sent Germania Euro unregistered trademark S Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels his Nobel Prize medal as a gift. His biographer Knut Hamsun interpreted this as part of the strategy to get an audience with Hitler. Hamsun was eventually invited to meet with Hitler. During the meeting, he complained about the German civilian administrator in Norway, Joseph Terborven, and asked that imprisoned Norwegian citizens be released, enraging Hitler. Otto Dietrich describes the meeting in his memoirs as the only time that another person was able to get a word in edgeways with Hitler. He attributes the cause to Hamsun's deafness. Regardless, Dietrich notes that it took Hitler 3 days to get over his anger. Hamsun also on other occasions helped Norwegians who had been imprisoned for resistance activities and tried to influence German policies in Norway. Nevertheless, a week after Hitler's death, Hamsun wrote a eulogy for him, saying he was a warrior for mankind, and a prophet of the gospel of justice for all nations. Following the end of the war, angry crowds burned his books in public in major Norwegian cities, and Hamsun was confined for several months in a psychiatric hospital. Hamsun was forced to undergo a psychiatric examination, which concluded that he had permanently impaired mental faculties, and on that basis the charges of treason were dropped. Instead, a civil liability case was raised against him, and in 1948 he had to pay a ruinous sum to the Norwegian government of 325,000 kroner for his alleged membership in Samling and for the moral support he gave to the Germans, but was cleared of any direct Nazi affiliation. Whether he was a member of Samling or not and whether his mental abilities were impaired is a much debated issue even today. Hamsun stated he was never a member of any political party. He wrote his last book Portraying style in 1949, a book many take as evidence of his functioning mental capabilities. In it, he harshly criticizes the psychiatrists and the judges and, in his own words, proves that he is not mentally ill. The Danish author Knut Hamsun investigated the trial and wrote the book The Hamsun Trial, which created a storm in Norway. Among other things, Hamsun stated, "If you want to meet idiots, go to Norway," as he felt that such treatment of the old Nobel Prize-winning author was outrageous. In 1996 the Swedish director Jan Troell based the movie Hamsun on Hamsun's book. In Hamsun, the Swedish actor Max von Sydow plays Knut Hamsun. His wife, Marie, is played by the Danish actress Gitte Nørby. Bibliography, 1877 Den Gårdflode. Enkjarlig history fra Nordland, 1878 Eg Jensen, 1878 Ger, 1889 Lars Oftedal. Udkast, 1889 Fra det moderne Amerikas Ainsliv, 1890 Sult, 1892 Mystria, 1893 Redactor Allinge, 1893 Nijord, 1894 Pan, 1895 Ved Regetsport, 1896 Livet Spill, 1897 Siesta, 1898 Aftenreder. Slutningsspill, 1898 Victoria. Enkjarlig history, 1902 Munkenvent. Brigantine Saga I, 1903 IA Vent Island. Opelvat Ogdra Mti Caucasian, 1903 Droning Tamara, play, 1903 Kratskog, 1904 Det Vilde Kur, poetry, 1904 Svarrmere, 1905 Stridend Liv. Skildringa fra Vessen Augusten, 1906 under HSTSTJARNEN. En Vandres Fortelling, 1908 Benini, 1908 Rosa, Af Student Perilius for Pyra Rosa, 1909 En Vandres Spilomeds Sordin, 1909 En Vandres Spilomeds Sordin, 1910 Livet I Vold, play, 1912 Den Sids Gladder, 1913 Bar RN av Tiden, 1915 Sigelfros by 1, 1915 Sigelfros by 2 Sigelfros Town, 1917 Markens Grada 1, 1917 Markens Grada 2, 1918 Sprige Fair, 1920 Knenved van Posen I, 1920 Knenved van Posen 2, 1923 Sistka Pite 1, 1923 Sistka Pite 2, 1927 Landstreicher I, 1927 Landstreicher 2, 1930 August I, 1930 August 2, 1933 Men Live at Lever I, 1933 Men Live at Lever 2, 1936 Ringen Sluthead, 1949 Pork Grodsteyer, Nobel Prize-winning writer Isaac Bashevis Singer translated some of his works. Cinematization of literary works. Hamsun's works have been the basis of 25 films and television mini-series adaptations, starting in 1916. The book Mysteries was the basis of a 1978 film of the same name, directed by Paul de la Sannette, starring Sylvia Crystal, Rutger Hauer, Andrea Ferrell and Rita Tushingham. Landstreicher is a Norwegian film from 1990 directed by Ola Solum. The Telegraphist is a Norwegian movie from 1993 directed by Erik Gustavsson. It is based on the novel Mothwise. Pan has been the basis of 4 films between 1922 and 1995. The latest adaptation, the Danish film of the same name, was directed by Henning Carlsen, who also directed the Danish, Norwegian and Swedish co-production of the 1966 film Salt from Hamsun's novel of the same name. Modernist filmmaker Jesse Richards has announced he is in preparations to direct an adaptation of Hamsun's short story The Call of Life. Cinematized biography, a biopic entitled Hamsun was released in 1996, directed by Jan Troell, starring Max von Sydow as Hamsun. References. Further reading, Ferguson, Robert. 1987. Enigma, The Life of Knut Hamsun. Farrar, Straus and Giroux. Haugen, Jar G.N. 2004. The Fall of the Sun God. Knut Hamsun, A Literary Biography Oslo, Øyhug. Humpel, Martin. 1999. The Roots of Modernist Narrative, Knut Hamsun's Novels Hunger, Mysteries and Pan. International Specialized Book Services. Cullen, Inga Sletten 2009. Knut Hamsun, Dreamer and Dissident. Yale University Press. ISBN 978-0-300-12356-2, Larsen, Hannah Astrup. 1922. Knut Hamsun Alfred A. North. Now SS, Harold, Nobel Prize Laureates in Literature, Part 2, Farmington Hills, Michigan, Gale, ISBN 978-0-7876-8148-7, Shah, Matthew 2009. Tackling Knut Hamsun. Review of Sletten, Dreamer and Dissenter and Angstrom 1/2 Agar, The Dark Side of Literary Brilliance. In Los Angeles Times, October 25, 2009. Durance, Michelle. 2007. Hamsun. Editions Parker S., Paris, 128p. Angstrom 1/2 Agar, Monica. 2009. The Dark Side of Literary Brilliance. University of Washington Press. External links. Biographical National Library of Norway commemoration page, biography, from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Hamsun Bibliography 1879 Euro 2009, Literature on Knut Hamsun, at Nobel Prize website, Christopher Jensen and Knut Hamsun at the National Library of Norway, Knut Hamsun's America at the Norwegian American Historical Association, Knut Hamsun's Early Years in the Northwest in Minnesota History Magazine, Petri Laakkonen. Knut Hamsun. Books and Writers. Archived from the original on July 4, 2013. Knut Hamsun, Dreamer and Dissenter, Bio and Review at the New Republic, September 2010. Knut Hamsun Online, fan-supported website. Works Hamsun Bibliography 1879 Euro 2009 published by the National Library of Norway and the University Library of Tromsø. Works by Knut Hamsun at Project Gutenberg, works by or about Knut Hamsun at Internet Archive, works by Knut Hamsun at LibriVox, works by Knut Hamsun at Project Gutenberg, Det Bilderkær 1904 at the Internet Archive. Other Wood, James, Addicted to Unpredictability, an essay. Retrieved October 8, 2006. Chelsea on the Edge, The Adventures of an American Theatre, Davy Napoleon. Includes discussion of Ice Age, a controversial production in which Hamsun is the protagonist. Iowa State University Press. ISBN 0-8138-1713-7, 1991. Norwegian Nobel laureate, once shunned, is now celebrated, New York Times. February 27, 2009.